Being a thoroughbred horse trainer takes a lot of work and passion. It also requires a large team of people to make sure these racehorses are cared for properly. My guest on this episode explains everything that goes into the thoroughbred racing industry, how his family has made an impact on the sport in the United States, and how he's carrying on the tradition from Hall of Fame trainer Jack Van Berg, who is also his dad. Next on Sports in the Making. Thank you for joining me on Sports in the Making, a podcast where we find out what people in the sports and sports broadcasting industry do, how they've made an impact in the sports world, and how it all comes together. I'm your host, Don Cardona, and this is episode number 21. In my sports broadcasting career, I've met some amazing people and developed some great relationships with fellow TV people, some who work in front offices, and professional athletes. But it's interesting to me that my guest on today's episode is someone I met 6 years before my first job in television, while I was a freshman at Arizona State University. We lived in the same dormitory, becoming lifelong friends, and it was there that I was introduced to horse racing at the highest level, and I became a fan not only of the sport, but of his family. His name is Tom Van Berg, and he's a thoroughbred horse trainer currently living near Louisville, Kentucky. He is the son of Hall of Fame trainer Jack Van Berg, who won the Kentucky Derby with Ali Sheba in 1987. And he's the grandson of Marion Van Berg, who is enshrined as a Hall of Fame trainer as well. So it's no surprise that the legacy continues with Tom. In this episode, we'll talk about what his childhood was like with his father, how he decided to become a trainer himself, and we'll talk a bit about what the industry is like as a trainer. This is my conversation with my good friend, Tom Van Berg. All right, Tom and I met at university, which we'll get to in a minute, but Tom's a horse trainer based in Louisville, Kentucky, and according to Equibase, which is a trade magazine for the horse racing industry, he's got, at the moment, $4.2 million in earnings on the track with nearly 200 wins in his relatively, I guess I'd say, short training career, even though he's been around it his whole life. He's the son and grandson of two Hall of Fame thoroughbred horse trainers, the late Jack Van Berg, who many know from his horse Ali Sheba, and Marion Van Berg. Tom, how are you? Thank you for joining me today.
I'm doing great. Good to talk to you, Donnie.
All right, so Tom, first off, what are your responsibilities as a horse trainer?
Being a horse trainer is it's a jack of all trades. First off, you're a basic caretaker. So you're a basic caretaker of an animal. You take care of their nutrition, their fitness, their feet, make sure they're healthy, their feet are healthy, their teeth are healthy. You don't actually do the dental work, but you notify the equine dentist when that is required. You notify the blacksmith to take care of their feet when it's required, and you do any day-to-day maintenance in between those schedules. And then you have to, in particular in the racing industry, then you have to kind of prepare them for competition. And so you have to decide what that level of horse is going to achieve, and where you're going to place him, and then what distance, whether it's a shorter race, you go in 6 furlongs, which is 3/4 of a mile, or over a mile or longer, and it may be a grass horse or it may be a dirt horse. So there's different competitions and different races that they can compete in, and you have to determine to the best of your ability what that horse will specialize in, and prepare him for that. So there's a lot of different things, but I guess you could say it's mainly just a caretaker of an animal, and you do the best you can to make sure that animal is healthy and happy and fit and ready to go when it comes time for competition.
How much did you grow up around your dad, considering he was on the road quite a bit, training horses in California and Louisville and wherever he had good horses?
Yeah, my mother and father divorced when I was young. And even before that, my father was on the road most of the year. I would see him. I grew up in Columbus, Nebraska, which is a small town of about 20,000. And we had a livestock auction there, and he would come in about once a month to do what's called a Montana sale, which is they'd bring the cattle down from Montana and the farmers would buy the cattle, and it was a big sale. So he would come and actually be the auctioneer for that sale. And then the rest of the month, the local auctioneers would do the smaller sales. And so I would see him probably once a month, unless it was the summertime. And then in the summer, we'd either be at a race meet somewhere in the country or at one of our farms in Louisville, Kentucky, and I'd be working at the farm there. But for the most part, during the school year, I was, he was on the road with the different various strings he had of horses, outfits that he had, and I was in Nebraska going to school. So I rarely saw him during the school year, but in the summers I saw him quite a bit.
Well, we met at Arizona State University. We were both freshmen living in Saguaro Hall, the dorms there. How did you get to Arizona State? Did you think you wanted to be a trainer? You wanted to do engineering, from what I believe.
Yeah, that's correct. When I got out of high school, I was pointing towards aerospace engineering, and I looked at 5 different universities: it was Iowa State, University of Colorado Boulder, UCLA, Arizona State, and then a specialty aeronautical school called Embry-Riddle, which there was a campus in Prescott, Arizona, and one in Florida. And after my visits, I grew up in Nebraska, which is pretty brutal winters, and I went to Iowa State and got snowed in. I went to CU Boulder, and although it was sunny, it was nice. It was still cold and snowy. I went to UCLA, and it was just I was almost claustrophobic. It was a beautiful campus, but it was packed in the middle of Los Angeles. And then I got to Arizona State, and it was like Shangri-La. It was open, it was sunny, great weather, and it was still within a 5.5 hour drive of Los Angeles, where my dad was based at the time. And so it probably academically wasn't up to par with the other ones, but it fit to what I was looking for. And I really didn't look into actually the horses until after I graduated. And I kind of transitioned from specialty in aeronautical engineering into business management with an aeronautical engineering minor. And I went that route. And then when I got out of college, that there was a big layoff period for McDonnell Douglas and Boeing and Lockheed, and they had those massive aerospace industry layoffs at the time. And so I traveled over in Europe. I figured I was going to work quite a bit the rest of my life. So I took a extended vacation to start off my career and traveled in Europe. And I was going to make my way to Australia to work their summer and bartending on the Gold Coast with a friend that I met from Australia. And the 2 ways you could get to Australia were either through Tokyo, I believe, or Los Angeles. And so what I decided to do is I'd fly through Los Angeles and gave my friend from Australia a tour of the Southwest and California, the West Coast. And then I would stay there and work a couple months for Dad and make some money. And then I'd meet him over there, and we would go bartend. And I never left Los Angeles. Dad got his hooks in me, and I stayed out there ever since.
So I just got to tell you that, I grew up a sports fan, small town in Western Colorado, didn't really watch horse racing much except for obviously the Kentucky Derby, Breeders' Cup, Preakness, all that stuff. But when I got to know you, I still specifically remember there was one, I believe it was a Saturday morning, but I remember sitting in my dorm and you run down the hall and said, "Come into Jeff's room. My dad's going to be on TV." And I'm thinking, what the heck? Your dad is going to be on TV? Who's your dad? So I remember seeing your dad on TV. He had Ali Sheba was in the race. I don't remember which race it was or what it was, but I do know that he was a Kentucky Derby winner. And so suddenly everyone looked at you and was like, "Whoa, this kid's dad is a big shot." And I think, we all were like, this is cool. But then we just developed a friendship from it. And, because of you, I went to California for the first time for a party that your dad was having for a bunch of the horsemen and horse people. I got to rub a lot of elbows with some athletes, Don and Charlie's up in Scottsdale, the steakhouse. I think there was a bunch of jockeys around the table and stuff. It was really my first exposure to that culture of it. And it was really cool. And then you and I had the chance to go to the Fiesta Bowl, the national championship game that was Notre Dame beating West Virginia. And we sat right behind George Wendt, if you remember.
I do.
Better known as Norm from Cheers. So one thing that I like about you is you have this ability to bring people into your circle and just create friendships. How do you do that?
Well, the horse racing is such a fringe sport, in my opinion. It used to be more mainstream, and when I get involved with anything in my life, it's usually a passion for it, and it starts with a passion for it. And so when I have a passion for something, I enjoy sharing that with other people. And it's same thing with friendships and just any kind of relationship you have. And so when I got involved with horse racing, it wasn't really that I wanted to go out and tell anybody, my dad is a Hall of Fame horse trainer, because he was really large in the industry. But outside of the industry, if you're not involved in it, you don't really know the players in the industry like you do in basketball or NFL or anything like that. And so I would always prefer to show people what it is to be in horse racing and to be a horse trainer than I would tell them. It didn't make sense for the most part to me when you try to explain it. And so to me, it really wasn't like my father was any kind of big deal. To people that were in the racing industry, he was a pretty prominent figure in the industry. So I grew up just him being dad,
Yeah.
and he was that way too. He was always wanted to bring people in and teach them and let them experience, part of that lifestyle, part of that industry. And so that's kind of where I got that basis from. I was always grounded. He grew up, a hardworking individual, on a basically, working with livestock as a young age, and then his father got into horse racing. So that's where I saw it. It wasn't a man that came with a silver spoon and had an elevated lifestyle his whole life. He worked very hard for everything he got, but he always remained grounded, and that's just kind of where I got it from. And I enjoy people. I enjoy sharing with people, and it's just been something my whole life that I've kind of had a passion being around people, and it was fun to be able to share that with college friends and roommates and classmates, and I've done that continually through the rest of my life.
Well, and that's what I kind of appreciated, not just your friendship that I value, but meeting your dad for the first time. I mean, he's a very tall man and very imposing and kind of intimidating, but it was something about him that you're drawn to him, and he would make you feel like you were the most important person every time you talked to him. So I think you have a lot of that in you as well.
Well, I appreciate it. He was very much so. I mean, he was one of those people that when he walked in the room, he would command the room by either by his stories or by, any experiences that he had. He was one of those characters that's almost larger than life. The things that he has accomplished in his life and the things that he's done in his life are just, you don't see much of that anymore. I mean, he was when he used to do, go to livestock auctions for his father, he got his pilot's license and would fly a plane. And I remember stories, from his brother who was in the livestock business in Colorado back in the day. When they would have blizzards, you didn't have the instrument, ratings that you had today. They would follow road maps and fly above roads through Kansas to get to the towns to find the airports to land to go to livestock auctions. And you think about that today, it's just you don't hear stuff like that. I mean, he just always figured out a way to make things happen. I mean, I think when he was 15 years old, my grandfather had a string of horses in Detroit, Michigan, at the old DRC race course, and Dad, with no navigation, just a Rand McNally map, at 15 years old, drove a 18-wheeler big semi truck full of horses on 2-lane roads all the way to Michigan from Columbus, Nebraska. And today you hear that and you might get put in jail if you had to try to get your son to do that. But it's just a different way of people being raised, and it's a different era of people. And he worked really hard, and till the day he passed away a couple of years ago. I mean, he was still probably one of the hardest working people that I've been around, and he continued that. And it was all based on passion. And he was the same way. He loved bringing people into his world. And like you say, he had that knack for when he was with you, there wasn't anything else going on. He was involved with the person he was with and focused on them and showed an interest in them. And the amazing thing about him is I've never seen people work harder for a person. I mean, he would get people that didn't want to work, and they would work night and day for him. He just had that ability around people. He was a great leader, put it that way. He was a great leader because he would lead by example and show people what how to do it, and then he would be right beside him doing it. So I think it was some really good qualities to be horse trainers. He had all those qualities.
You mentioned growing up, you didn't really have much contact with him, I think, like a traditional family, understandably so. But how would you describe your dad as a dad?
It's tough because he really wasn't a traditional father in the sense for me. He was more that larger than life person that I knew if I ever needed anything, he would be there to help me. He was there with support. He was there, anytime he needed something, he would drop whatever was going on and be there to support me. So it was never like I never had a lack of love from him or anything like that. It wasn't one of those, I love you families. He didn't say that all the time, but he showed you that more by his actions than by words. That's one thing I never had any insecurity in my life that if something went wrong, if I got sideways with school or with a person, or heaven forbid if I ever got sideways with the law, which I never did, he was there and he was going to make things right and help you out and be there to support you. So he was just one of those figures that you knew he had your back all the time, and even though he wasn't there physically, he was there in spirit and in support for me from day one until he passed away.
There's been a lot of things written about your dad. There's some documentaries out there. And then Chris Kotulak, who is the CEO of Fauner Park in Grand Island, Nebraska, he and I were colleagues at TVG Network when I was a director there. So, one of the
Oh, I
nicest
forgot about
guys.
that. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the nicest guys I've ever met. And he had a good relationship with your dad. He wrote a book called Jack From Grit to Glory, the true story of Jack Van Berg, an American horse racing legend. When these things come out, do you learn more about your dad? Does it paint a better picture for you, or do you kind of hear that anyways?
You know what was really interesting about that book? I heard all those stories and lived through those stories growing up, but to read them from a book, it was a lot more emotional for me. For whatever reason, it just touched me in a different way than living them, and to hear him, from the words of Chris Kotulak, and he did such an incredible job with that book. It was just a different way. It was, I guess maybe it brought back some of the memories and
Mm-hmm.
some of the, some of the stories that I went through, and some of the stories that were before my time and that I had heard. But it was such a great compilation of Dad's life and just the character that he was as a person. Chris did an incredible job with that book to bring that out. And if anybody's a horse racing fan, it's a really incredible read. And like you'll find in the book that you just don't find people like that much anymore. There was so much about them that they did, and there's nothing they couldn't do. And if they had something they wanted done, they found a way to get it done. And you see these people today that are super successful. It's just they have to have a passion for it, and that's what Dad had a passion for. He could care less about vacation. He didn't want to go to the beach. He didn't want to go snow skiing. I mean, his work was his love and his passion. And when he woke up in the morning, from the minute he woke up until the his eyes went to close at night, that's all he thought about was horses. And he had an incredible mind for it. And he would tell you that he wasn't the smartest kid out there, but he was a genius when it came to horses.
I'm sure you've learned a lot from your dad in terms of just being a person, because I can tell it's carried over to that, and you'll continue that legacy. But what did you learn most about training horses from your dad?
The hard thing for me was I didn't spend a lot of time with him, regrettably, on the racetrack. When I got out of college, I went out to LA, and like I said, I was going to on my way to Australia, but he got his hands in me. And at that time, I think Workman's Comp was out there, was like 33 cents on the dollar. It was outrageous. And they had horse racing, thoroughbred horse racing, lumped in with quarter horse racing, which at that time was particularly more accident prone than thoroughbred was. And they had it in with the textiles, which was a large immigrant workforce, and there were a lot of claims in there, so that it was a really high work comp. And so, Dad put me together with a gentleman out there, and my job was to work on a workman's compensation co-op out there in California, and we ended up getting the work comp from 33 cents on the dollar to about 10 cents on the dollar. And while I was doing that, he said, you're not doing anything at 5 a.m. Why don't you come into the barn with me, and we'll go over the horses and we'll train. And so that's kind of when my instruction began with my father. That wasn't until after I was out of college.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was out there for like 3 years in California, and he sent me out on the road to Exarban in Omaha, Nebraska. And happened to be their last year that Exarban ran. And with the condition that he would come to whatever track I was at with a string of his horses for 2 days out of the week. Well, that never materialized. And so basically he threw me out there with enough rope to hang myself, and I could either hang myself or pull myself up. And I learned kind of a lot of it by mistakes. And once in a while he would come in, maybe once a month, he would come in. And so that deal that I set when we were going out with the string of horses for him never materialized. And so I went from Nebraska, the last meet there, to spent a year in Maryland, and then moved to Kentucky in '96 to Louisville, and all the time running a string of horses for him. And then we ended up developing a 550-acre training facility just outside of Louisville in early 2000s for a client. And I had 100 horses out there for him. And still, Dad was based out in California. And then I think in '03, maybe I ended up taking a stable out of my own till '08. My oldest son was developed leukemia. I was diagnosed with leukemia. And so I backed out of the game for 10 years. And so all that time, what I anticipated, spending time learning from Dad hands-on, was very accelerated for the first 3 years in Los Angeles. And then it really spread out and was kind of diluted So the rest of the time, and that was probably one of my biggest regrets, that I didn't get to spend more time with him, hands on the track, because he was such a brilliant horseman, and so much of it was intuitive that it was hard to just talk about it unless you were actually at the stable that he was at and saw it with your eyes, what he was talking about, what he was seeing. And so I wish I spent a lot more time with him, and it just never worked out that way.
So now how have you taken his philosophies to make it work for you? Are you doing things similar? Do you alter things based on the current horse racing industry? How does that work for you?
Yeah, it's kind of really changed dramatically, from when Dad was when he was at his peak. And actually, my assistant right now, Samuel Alvarez, was with Dad forever. In fact, he was the groom of Gate Dancer, the person responsible for taking care of Gate Dancer when he won the Preakness in '84. So he's been with us nearly 40 years between me and my father. And so Sammy still does a lot of things in the barn that, in the fashion that Dad did. And so sometimes there's newer technologies, there's new training techniques, or whatever you want to, whatever road we go down, that have been proven to do differently than what we did in the past. And so it takes me some time to say, hey, Sam, let's try this, and move in this direction as opposed to what we used to do. And so it's a little bit of a hybrid of old school horsemanship and modern technology and modern fitness, and you bring some more things in that, modern science that we didn't know at the time. You did things back in the olden days based on what you thought and read the horse, and it might not have been the exact correct thing that we would do today based on science and nutrition or fitness and heart rate and what might you have, or bone development or muscle development, or lung capacity, and all that stuff is the science has changed, and we've been more enlightened into the way people or animals handle nutrition or fitness and all that. So there's new things that you learn every day, and that you have to employ in your game to and incorporate into your training program that wasn't around when Dad was really at his peak.
What does a typical day and week look like for a horse trainer?
Well, the thing about horse training is it's 24/7, basically 365. You that's the hard part about the game, is you have to force yourself to take breaks, because typically, with a 9 to 5 job, you have weekends off. With horse racing, the weekends are typically pretty heavy, with the better horses running on the weekend, the better races on the weekends. So Saturday and Sunday are your big days. Monday and Tuesday, typically for most tracks, are days when they do not run. So Monday and Tuesdays are your days off, but you still go in. Horses require care nonstop, and so you have to be there, or you have to have an assistant there or someone there almost all the time to monitor the horses and make sure they're okay, they're healthy, they're not in trouble. Horses have a knack. It's like the better the horse is, and the more they can run, they have a knack of getting in more trouble, whether they get down in their stall, or get bumped or bruised, or run into something, and you have to pay attention to them all the time. So typically your day would be, you usually get to the track around 4:30 in the morning, and the reason you have to do that is because at racetracks they train in the morning, early in the morning, from anywhere from 5:30 or 6 till about 10 o'clock, because usually in the afternoons they're running. So horses are creatures of schedule, and so you train them the same time, around the same time every day, and you run them when they typically run the same time on those days. And so you train from 5 or 5:30 to 6 to 10 o'clock. They'll have lunch, and then if you have racing that day, you go home, get ready for the races, go back, get your horses ready, run, cool them out, feed them, and again at night, and you get done by somewhere around 6 o'clock. So it's almost a 12 to 13-hour day on your typical day. So it is not an easy job by any means, but like we talked about earlier, that people that are in this game, that are in this industry, have to have a passion for it, because it's long hours, it's hard hours. The highs are very high, the lows are very low. It's something that, I guess, if you don't have a passion for it, you get burned out on very quick.
Yeah. Okay. The horse trainer crew, team, positions, and relationships. Who is a significant part of making a thoroughbred racehorse successful?
The thing about it is, each probably organization has a little different hierarchy, but typically you have a horse trainer who is the head. It's basically like your CEO of your corporation. Then you have an assistant trainer, which would be like your VP, and he takes care of your day-to-day operation. Usually, for the most part, like the hirings or the firings of employees, the day-to-day operations of the barn. If the stable is large enough, and if you have, I would say somewhere in the range of 30 plus horses. Then you would have what's called a foreman, a shed row foreman, and he's the human relations guy. He takes care of the employees and makes sure they're doing everything right, and keeps them on track. And then it goes down from there. So you have exercise riders, who are the guys that get on the horses, or guys or gals that get on the horses in the morning and on the horses day to day. Then you would have your grooms, who are the people that take care of the horses. And usually they take care of anywhere from 3 to 5 horses, typically, depending on their ability and their experience. And then you'd have what's called hot walkers, and the hot walkers are the ones responsible for cooling the horses out after they run or train. And then once in a while, you'll probably employ particularly a jockey, and he'll come in and breeze the horses sometimes in the morning if you're getting ready for a race. And you would use a jockey typically when they're getting close to a race. So you want that jockey to be on them and get familiar with that horse that he's going to ride in the afternoon. And then your ancillary group, or your extra groups, are your outside people, like your feed men that supply you with the feed and the hay and the straw, your veterinary that comes in and takes care of your medical needs for the horses, and then your blacksmith and your dentist that take care of the feet and the teeth. And that's kind of your in a generalized sort. You may have chiropractors that come in. You may have therapy personnel that can do. I mean, these horses get incredible care. They have hydro spas on the backside where the horse goes in and get a cold water, salt water massage, basically a spa. They have chiropractors. They have acupuncturists. They have laser therapy. They have ice therapy. And they have all kinds of different things that take care of these horses' needs, and then they're treated like a top-notch human athlete, and they get everything they need, from the top line of nutrition to the top line of therapy that makes them be able to perform their best. So there's a pretty good extended range of people that come on the backside and on the stable side of the track to take care of these horses. And as a trainer, you're kind of the CEO that organizes all that and oversees all that.
And that's amazing that you had to learn all of that shortly after getting out of college, and here you are 20 some years later still doing it.
Yeah, the thing about horse racing industry is it's really a old school type industry. You don't really go. They do have schools for it, but typically the path that most people take are they just go on the backside and start working in the barns. And either your family's in it, or you knew somebody that was in it, or you have a passion for it, and you start out maybe as a hot walker and move up to a groom, to move up to an assistant trainer or foreman. And some of the jockeys or the lighter people jump into the riding side of it, the exercise riders in the morning. And so you build your way up through experience, and it's it's those long hours, and the people that are willing to be there 18 hours out of the day are the ones that usually go on with the business, and you show that passion, they become successful in their own right. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of work to become successful in this business. It's not one of those ones you can go to school and become a doctor. There's no real school for the horse industry, and you learn by being around the horse. And that was one of the benefits that I had when my father was out in California. Is he had a string of 50 horses, and so I get to see 50 different examples every day of what to do or what not to do. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of expedite your learning. Whereas if you're in a smaller stable, you have 8, it takes me, 6 days as long, just to see the same amount I would in one day under my father's stable. So
right.
That was a big help, is seeing the numbers. And I think typically when you see super successful horse trainers or jockeys, it becomes a numbers thing. Just like they say the statistics of college football to pro football, especially in quarterbacks, is the numbers of the number of reps that a quarterback takes in college usually translates well to the number, how successful they are in the pros. And the same thing with horse racing, is the number of reps you take every day of horses you see, things you see, what not to do or what to do, what works and what doesn't work, helps you become a more successful individual in this industry.
I think we all know, if we've ever watched a horse racing event on TV, that the trainer is typically one of the key figures in the victory of a horse, but the trainer also has to deal with ownership and the business side of it. How does that work? Trying to get horses, maybe you solicit horses to a potential owner if it works that way. How does that all come together for someone who does what you do?
I probably should figure that one out a little better than I have. The problem with me is I'm a very straightforward and honest person, and my father was the same way. And horse racing is not, you can't look at it as an investment. And what I mean by that is, if you're getting in the horse racing business, it's kind of like I always said, if you're going to Vegas, you go to Vegas to a casino with money that you can afford to lose, and if you lose it, you're fine when you go home. You don't go with money that you don't have to lose, thinking that you're going to make money. And so that's the same way the business is the horse. So it's hard for me to talk people into the game. The people that I usually get involved with as clients are people that enjoy the horses, and so they come out and they learn. They get to spend time with their horses. I teach them, why we do, what we do, and why we point for races that we point, and kind of teach them the game from my side of it, not necessarily as a client. I don't deal with the people that are in it trying to, for the most part, make stallions or have brood mares or it's a commercial operation. I've never really been involved with that kind of clientele. Not that I, would enjoy it. They have usually the better blood stock and the better horses, but it's a higher risk game, and it's just a little bit elevated game. I enjoy, the feet on the ground, being in the stalls. I don't enjoy necessarily promoting myself to go out there and say, hey, I'd do a better job with this horse, or he'd fit really well in my barn. There's a lot of great horsemen out there. I just enjoy being with the horses. I enjoy teaching people about the horses, and it's really a blessing to be out with these animals every day. I was away for 10 years when my son was being treated for leukemia, and I didn't really realize how much I missed it until my dad started, his health started failing, and I got back in to help him out, and to get back in the barn with those horses was just it was one of those aha moments where everything was right again. I didn't realize kind of the hole that I had in my life that I wasn't around him. And so to me, it's that part of the game is, I've never been, really successful at. Dad always had a large stable and had clients, from all over the world. Mine has been more on almost a friendship basis, where I'm, probably closer individually to the clients that I train for. And they spend a lot more time at the track and at the barn seeing their horses than I think your typical trainer and typical outfit, in these days. It's a lot more of a business end of it now, and the bigger stables are the ones that produce, the bigger winners, and then that just kind of multiplies from the sales and so forth. And so it's a little different side of the industry, and it's kind of also been during this the time of the COVID right now, those last few months, it's kind of been a blessing, because I can't imagine being one of those outfits that has 60, 70, 80, 90, 150 horses, and not be able to run in multiple jurisdictions right now, and trying to talk to those people and say, hey, we still have to train these horses, but you can't run for 2.5 months or 3 months. We have no chance of making any income, and so it's creates a lot of interesting and chaotic decision making processes that when with a smaller stable now, we can we're a little more agile, and we can move around, and it's not as impactful as it is on some of the larger stables.
Well, speaking of that, how have you been able to deal with this COVID-19? Because I think Kentucky is one of the few states that has at least allowed more racing than some of the other states.
Well, Kentucky actually was on. They came back sooner, I should say, than most states. But what was lucky for me is we were based at Oaklawn Park in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and Oaklawn was one of the, I think, 4 tracks that continued to run. And the reason they were able to do that is because they were racing at the time. And so they didn't have to bring in any new horse populations, any new, people populations. Whereas if like Churchill would have started up, say, when they were going to originally run the Derby in May, they would have brought horses in the end of March. All these horses and people would have in the help, that take care of the horse, would have been coming in from areas that, say, fairgrounds, where had a pretty big COVID outbreak. New York had a pretty big COVID outbreak. Florida didn't as much, but you're still bringing, people in from multiple locations that you can't control as much as you could, like say at Oaklawn, where they're already running and the population was already there, and you can start testing on a daily basis. And so I was very fortunate to be at Oaklawn, and we were able to continue to run to the end of the meet. And last year they actually extended their meet almost 3 weeks to coincide with their last day of running, was the day of the Kentucky Derby. And so what happened this year now is they moved their big race, which is the Arkansas Derby, which was typically 3 weeks before the Kentucky Derby. They moved it actually to Derby Day, and we're using it to Kentucky Derby Day, which was able to use it now as a Kentucky Derby prep, which is going to run in September. So they carried that big race to the final day of their meet and had their big day with all the stakes races on their final day. And so we didn't miss a bump. We didn't miss, I should say, we didn't miss a beat. Is we kept on running at Oaklawn until the very end. Now there was a slight delay from Churchill opening from the end of Oaklawn, and so Churchill did a great job of bringing the different jurisdictions into Churchill. They started, I think, May 11th with the fairgrounds, which was Churchill owns the fairgrounds, and so that was one of their tracks that actually closed early, and so that track hadn't run for, I think, about 3 weeks, and so they brought them May 11th and 12th. They allowed the fairgrounds to come and tested everybody coming in, did the swab test for everybody coming in, and then 11th to 12th was, I think, fairgrounds. 13th to 14th was New York horses. 15th and 16th was Florida horses, and 17th and 18th was Arkansas. And so they brought them in waves to make sure they kind of kept the population apart and tried to control if they did have any positives from the employees on the backside before it got into the general population. And so they did a really good job of bringing it in. And then so far it's gone pretty much without a hitch. They've kept running. But like you say, there at the time, people didn't know what was going on. They thought racing was going to quit. Santa Anita shut down. They've been plagued with injuries from last year, going back to last year, and then the COVID and the health department out there. California's kind of on a slippery slope with some of the activists out there wanting to get racing abolished out there. New York had some positives on the backside, a greater number of positives, not huge, maybe 7 or 9, 7 and 9, somewhere in there on the backside. And so they had to quarantine those. So they shut racing down, and New York was a hot spot. New Orleans got to be a hot spot, so they shut fairgrounds down. So at the time, the only people that were really running were Gulfstream Park in southern Florida, Tampa Bay Downs in Tampa. Let me see, Fonder Park, where you were talking about Chris Kotulak. They were running, and then Oaklawn Park. And what they found was that with no other sports going, horse racing got the spotlight. And they had incredible days of handle. People from all over the world were betting on the races. Even Fonder Park set a record. They extended into their meet, and I think they went over 100 million in handle, which is incredible for the size of track that Fonder is.
Right.
But there were records set left and right, and so I think what it really showed is that I think we have our view of sports now is so oversaturated. There's more football games. They always push for more football games each year. College wants more games. Pro wants more games. They get more basketball games. The playoffs go longer. Hockey expands, and I think there's so much content out there for people to view that horse racing is one of the ones that kind of gets shuffled aside.
Yeah.
But when it's the only thing out there, I mean, people in this country love sports, and I think they really took to horse racing. And I think hopefully created some fans that really hadn't paid attention to it before and really started to watch it, enjoy it. And I know I had friends here that were calling me on a daily basis, asking me for tips on races. What do you like at Oaklawn today, Tom? I never even knew they watched a horse race in their life, but they couldn't wait. They were stuck at home, not doing anything, or between conference calls and watching races. So it was an interesting, change for our society, is to see, how they took horse racing and built it up and watched it and created almost a new group of fans. And so we'll see if that continues once, the other sports start coming back into the fold.
Well, and you mentioned there's a lot of saturation for a lot of different sports. Horse racing used to be the king of sports. Is that the right term for it?
Yeah, that's used to call it the king. Yeah,
yeah.
King of sports. Yeah.
And it's kind of fallen back. I think TVG, the Horse Racing Network, has somewhat revived it a little bit. But I think that it's such a majestic sport. It's fun to be out there on the track. You get to see the horses and stuff. From your perspective, what pre-COVID was the future in your mind for horse racing, and now that this has happened, what, if you have a different take on it, what's that?
Well, actually, we're going back to it's the sport of kings.
Sport of kings. That's right.
Yeah. But the thing that will be interesting to see after these last couple of months is when Oaklawn was the only major track running in Gulfstream. I guess Gulfstream and Oaklawn were the two major tracks running. California wasn't running. New York wasn't running. The field sizes and the quality of the fields at Oaklawn Park were unbelievable. They were probably second only to maybe a Breeders' Cup Day or a Kentucky Derby Day with the size of the fields and the quality involved. And so the handle was enormous. It's just almost unheard of, the numbers that they were dealing with. And I think what people realized, and it'll be interesting going forward that there may be, there in the past there was so much money out there, you could avoid some of the big horses if you had a nice horse and go to different locations because the money was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, once a month there would be maybe a $750,000 race for the top older horses, or $500,000 race for mid. And so all the big horses went to that track and ran it. Well, now there's maybe 3 on the same day in different tracks, and so you can avoid it. So the fields are diluted, they're watered down. The big guys don't, the big horses don't meet up with each other until the Breeders' Cup a lot of times. But in the last month and a half, you're seeing now that when one track is running, predominantly one of the big tracks is running, all those horses from the other parts of the country, the best horses come in and run against each other. So the quality of racing is risen to a level that you don't see very often. And so you almost wonder in the back of your mind if these tracks are going to start, thinking about this, saying, well, why do I run against, take, for instance, Keeneland runs in the spring in Lexington, Kentucky for 3 weeks. Then Churchill goes in for, 8 weeks. But at the same time they're running, Belmont's running up in New York. Santa Anita's running out in California. And you almost wonder now, these tracks say, you know what, I could do better if I ran these 3 weeks. Say, for instance, Churchill runs 3 weeks, and then what we'll do is let Belmont run for 3 weeks. And then we'll let Santa Anita run 3 weeks. And they'll make everybody, the big outfits and the big horses, go to those meets and create a better product. And that's where you wonder, because the smaller horsemen, the smaller horse outfits are going to have trouble if that becomes a reality. But, one of the biggest problems in the horse industry is there's no national racing commission. There's no commissioner that looks over, like in baseball, and makes the decisions what's best for the industry. Mm-hmm. So each state has their own, fiefdom is they make their own decisions. So I don't know if that will happen. I think for the sport, it would probably be an interesting discussion to have, because I think you're going to get more people interested in it, and it's going to be the product, may be much better. But I think what happens is then you get involved with the owners of the horses and the clients, and I think the potential revenue income greatly diminishes because it gets lesser racing and a lot tougher competition. And so normally you may have an outfit that makes $1 million a year. They might now make $600,000 a year because they're running up against tougher competition. They can't win all those races every time. So it changes the dynamics of the revenue and the opportunities quite dramatically from a industry participant than it does on the other side for handicappers and gamblers and
right,
fans from a viewing standpoint. So and track ownership. So it's a tricky slope to try to change all those dynamics. But I think there is a discussion going forward, probably is to have somebody oversee all of racing across the country. Whether it be giving dates out for racing, or whether it be medication policies and testing and distribution of the handle and all that, and the purse structures. I think you're going to see in the future, you're going to see the racing industry go in that direction, where they're going to try to get somebody to promote racing from one single entity rather than each state trying to create their own product.
I'm talking with Tom Van Berg, thoroughbred horse trainer and son of Hall of Fame trainer Jack Van Berg. All right, Tom, once you became a trainer, what was your first victory like? And what was the horse?
Wow. You know what? I wouldn't be able to tell you the first horse that I won with when I took my trainer's license out. It wasn't one of those monumental occasions, because I had been training for my dad and
okay,
named as assistant trainer. But the biggest one probably was after my father passed away. So 2 years ago, his health was failing, and he died December 26th, 2017. And so a few months prior to that, a couple of his larger clients sat down with myself and Dad's assistant, Sammy Almaraz, who's been, like I said, been with us for almost 40 years, and said, what does this look like if your dad, gets hospitalized or at that time, he's getting pretty sick. And they said, if he passes away, what is it something that you want to do, Tom? And, Dad he asked 2 things. He had 3 dogs. He said, make sure my dogs are taken care of, and make sure Sammy has a barn full of horses to oversee. That was his assistant. Those are the only 2 things he didn't say, Tom, I want you to take horses. It was Sammy and the dogs. And that just tells told me how much the horses meant to him and how much
Right.
Sammy meant to him over the years.
Yeah.
Sammy was always by his side. And so when we sat down with the clients and said, what does this look like? And I said, well, if you guys are committed, clients, if you guys are committed, and if Sammy's committed, then I will commit and I'll jump in and take over the stable and keep it going just like it has in the past. And I wouldn't have been able to do it without Sammy, because Sammy, I can't do 24/7 with my family anymore. 365. It's not something that I was willing to
Right.
undertake. But Sammy said no, he was definitely interested. He wanted to jump, he wanted to keep it going. The clients were, interested in keep it going with us. So we had a barn full of horses when Dad passed away, 30 horses coming to Hot Springs, Arkansas. And, from December 26th to, the second week of January, I had to get a business incorporated. I had to get bank accounts opened up. I had to, get invoicing out. I get payroll, and I had to create a whole business in a matter of about 2 weeks. I was on the phone with my attorney and a banker on the day of my dad's funeral, trying to get this thing work comp set up. You can't run unless you have work comp, and so I was getting all this set up. So the most memorable horse I probably will ever have is the first horse we ran as a stable after Dad had passed away. Was a filly that he had. It was a nice little filly that he had. Her name was Profound Moment, and she won. It was our first starter. And I'll never forget the race caller at Arkansas. The horse looked like she was finished at the top of the stretch. She looked like she was tired. It come off a little layoff because we had shipped from Kentucky to Hot Springs. It was one of the first days of the meet, and like she was getting tired, and they're going to pass her up, and she just kept on going. And the announcer said something to the effect that the jockey's hitting her right-handed and Jack's hitting her left-handed, and said something about the fact that it truly is a profound moment. And it was just amazing. That was the first horse we started, and she won. And the photographer who was at Churchill and at Oakland is a good friend of mine named Curtis Cody. He does a wonderful job. When he got us in the winner's circle, everybody had tears in their eyes, and he had everybody point up to the sky, to point to Dad. And when he printed the win picture, there's an old picture that he had in his photo stock of Dad with his cowboy hat on, smiling. And he took that, superimposed it above the winner's circle, and it was everybody pointing up to him. So it was just one of those things that you don't have those stories very often, but when they happen like that, it's almost like he was speaking to us.
You and I are Facebook friends. We connected after many, many years of being apart. But the one thing that I saw, if you don't mind me reading this Facebook post that you did from December 27th, 2019. It says, on the 2-year anniversary of Dad's passing, he still reminds us that he will always call the shots. One of the last yearlings that we selected won tonight, and fittingly, his name was JVB. Dad always reminds us that he is watching with some pretty incredible coincidences. Profound Moment wins as our first starter after he passed. Jack Van Berg wins on the Breeders' Cup undercard at Churchill Downs. Betty's Trinity, named after his sister, wins at First Asking on his birthday. And now JVB. I can't wait to see how he one-ups himself. Miss you, Dad. Do you still get those kinds of supernatural types of moments that happen?
It's weird. Those are I haven't had any more since then, but those are the ones. It's just amazing how that continually happens. I was talking to one of my dad's old clients called me the other day, and my stepmother Helen had a set of montages. I don't know if you ever saw them, but they were Dad's. They had 3 montages of kind of each part of Dad's life. One was of the family, one was of his racing, and one was of his training center in Kentucky. And one of the clients, I didn't even know they had it, but they're out in Washington State, and he called and said, Tom, I'm thinking about getting back into the horse game and want to know if you take a couple of horses for us. And so we started talking again. I hadn't talked to him in probably 20 years. Since I was out in California. And he had one of those sets of the montage. I didn't even know they had it. And it came with a set of cassettes that had the artist narrate why he painted what he painted and what it was significant about it. And it's on old cassettes, and it was in a leather bound case, brown leather, and it might have had like VB initials in Boston or whatever. And so he was taking a picture of it. He said, Tom, I want to send this back to you because your dad gave it to us and I think you should have it. And he was taking a picture of it to send back to me. Well, when he took the picture of it, it's just plain brown leather. When he takes the picture of it, whatever the way the camera lens or whatever was pointing, the leather came out and it was purple and gold. It wasn't brown anymore in the picture. And it's just bizarre, some of those things that happen. And like I said, Dad was one of those larger than life people. And if there's anybody that could, continue on and influence, out there, that he'd be the one to do it. I mean, he always had a certain way of doing things, and you knew that if you veered from the course, he would let you know. And it's just crazy how he's has that way of speaking. Still to this day, is there's little things I see every day. That I had a horse. I was telling one of my clients that I had this horse. He was a real nice horse. We claimed him for 25,000. He's made about 150,000 since. But he's really smart. He's just a beautiful animal. And he had worked a couple times in the morning, and he did little things differently that he hadn't done before. But every morning we it's religious with Dad. You check horses' legs every morning before they go out to the track. Make sure there's no changes. Make sure you don't find any extra heat, any inflammation anywhere, any changes from the day before. And so we go through and check every leg religiously. And this horse, I went to check legs, and you check. I always check just the way I do it. Is I check their left leg first. Check their knee, their ankle, their feet, their tendons, all that, and I check the right leg. And it started out, this horse, I would check his left leg, and as soon as I go to pick his right, check his right leg, he'd pick it up, wouldn't let me have it. He wouldn't, let me, I checked them while they're sitting on the ground, and while they're standing on the ground, and he would pick it up, and I couldn't check it. So I'm like, okay, put it back down. So we get it back down. I check it, and nothing there. No heat, no filling, no inflammation, nothing that I could discern that was different. And so we did this for about 2 weeks, and he kept on doing this to me, and he'd never done that before. And about 2 weeks later, I breezed him, and he had a little inflammation down just below his ankle. It's called a XYZ ligament. It's right below their ankle, on the bottom of their sesamoid, kind of the back inside of their ankle. And he had some inflammation in there. And when I palpated, it was pretty tender. So I called my vet up. I said, "You need to take a look at this. There's something going on. He's been trying to tell me for 2 weeks, and it didn't show up, but now there's something there." And sure enough, we did an ultrasound of it, and it just started a little bit of a tear in it. And probably had we run him during that time, he probably would have injured it, and probably, that's kind of a ligament that you don't come back from. He'd have been retired. And he was telling me, "Hey, dummy, look over here," for, probably for 2 weeks. So it's just those weird things that you don't see. I guess for a certain point of it, you have to be a little bit intuitive, trying to read it. But it's just like, Dad's up there telling me, this horse, hey, look over here.
Well, okay, so when Ali Sheba won the Kentucky Derby, and I did my research prior to us getting on this call, because obviously those memories are not so fresh anymore, but watching the YouTube video of it, your dad told legendary broadcaster Jim McKay that he would win the Kentucky Derby 7 months before he actually did. Feel like going out on a limb and making any kind of prediction for any of the horses in your stables?
Oh, not mine. No. That was a very rare. I mean, to call your shot like that. Actually, there was a guy named Chris Lincoln, who did a Budweiser episode every week at that time. It was kind of like almost like a sports center for horse racing. And Chris Lincoln would follow horse racing, all the different stakes, and he would report on them. And Dad, before Jim McKay even, Dad had him out a year prior to the Derby. So it would have been, May, almost a year ahead of time, out at his training center in LaGrange, Kentucky, just outside of Louisville. And there were two horses galloping in company, side by side. And they galloped. He had a 3/4 mile track, and they went around one time. And by the time they got back to each other, it didn't look like one was going faster than the other one. Their strides looked almost identical. But the one was almost an eighth of a mile in front of the other horse. He just did things so much easier than the other horse did. It looked the same, but he just covered that much more ground. And Dad pointed to him and said, "That horse will win the Derby next year." And Chris Lincoln's like, "Come on, Jack, you got to be kidding me." He's like, "No, I'm telling you, that horse will win the Derby next year." And that was Ali Sheba. So even probably 4 months before he told Jim McKay that, he told Chris Lincoln that. And Chris, to this day, I haven't talked to Chris in forever. And then Chris, I don't know where Chris is now. But he would tell that story every time. He's like, "Tom, I've never had anybody call a shot like that." He said, "Your dad was just so confident in that horse that, he just knew that was the one."
Well, it's an industry that is so risky in a sense. You're controlling it. You're trying to, shape an animal into the potential that it has. Your dad had that success. Your grandfather had that success, but it's not an easy thing to do. So, Is it something that crosses your mind? Like, would you like to be there? I mean, I'm sure that's every horse trainer's dream, but or do you have a better perspective based on what you've come to know within the industry?
I'd love to have a Derby horse. I mean, that's the ultimate goal of anybody. But like I say, the difficulty that is the Derby is the fact that back when in the 80s, probably, and maybe early 90s, the foal crop was somewhere around 44,000 foals born each year. So half of those are male, half of them are filly, half colts, half are fillies. So you're looking at half of that coal crop, 22,000 of colts. And the only time you can run the Derby is as a 3-year-old. And so you have to be ready and fit and have enough points eligible to make yourself eligible for the Derby on that first Saturday in May. And there are only 20 that get in, or 18, depending on the field of 18 or whatever is. So it's not like you have many opportunities. And then you compile on top of that you have a physical, breathing animal that it's not a motorcycle or a car that you can tune up and just put a new
Right.
part in and go again. These things, you have to keep them sound. You have to keep them happy. You have to keep them fit. You have to, just the slightest misstep or step in a uneven spot or a rock on the track or whatever it might be. There's been incidents where a horse drops a rider and is loose and runs into another horse and gets injured. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just so many variables that can change your path. And so to be able to be one of those horses as on the first Saturday in May is an incredible feat in of itself. And then on top of it to actually win it. And you look some of the biggest stables in the world. I think Todd Pletcher, he started, I don't know how many, it was like 28 horses in the Derby before he ever got his first win. He just got it recently. It may be up into the 30s how many he started before he actually got one. And that's one of the top trainers in the country that have the best stock. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like they're buying horses for, 18,000, 20,000. They're buying $500,000 babies, $1 million babies, trying to mold them into Derby winners. And for me or you or anybody else out there, for layman's term, that's like saying you have, LeBron James and Mia Hamm have a kid, a child.
Right.
That child probably has on general a better chance of being an athlete, a successful athlete, than say, the local bank teller with the accountant, that never played sports. It's just, some of it comes down to genes and it's hereditary, and an athlete produces an athlete, and that's the same with horses. And so when you have a barn full of $500,000 babies or $1 million babies, your chance are going to be better than somebody that doesn't. But then you get a guy like that has all the breeding stock, underneath his shed row like that, and still has a tough time winning. So it just tells you, how difficult it is. So, when I grew up, in my high school years in the 80s, Dad was there every year, every other year. So I thought that was just what you did.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know any better. I didn't realize how difficult it was until I got into the business and realized that, it's a lot more difficult than it looks. So yeah, I'd love to have a Derby horse. I'm not saying that it's going to crush me if I don't. I just love being around the horses. But we were fortunate enough to be involved with a filly that was in the Oaks last year, which is the filly, the female version of the Kentucky Derby, and so that was pretty exciting. So I mean, 2 years into the game, we have a Oaks filly, which was nice, and she ended up finishing. I think we finished 8th. There was a horse that got taken down, disqualified because it impeded another horse, so we moved up a spot. But
Yeah.
It was, you'd like to have run better, but it was very exciting to be on that trail and to experience all the energy and crazy chaotic hoopla of the press and everything during that week at Kentucky, Churchill Downs. So,
Yeah.
it's something that I think everybody in this business, if they told you they didn't want to be in the Kentucky Derby, they're crazy. Everybody would love to have that opportunity, but it doesn't come along very often.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, there's so many variables, and I was introduced to it, horse racing, from you. Got to know just the basics of it. And then when I started working at TVG, I learned really how many variables there are, from the ownership to the trainers, to the jockeys, to the care of the animal, the transportation of the animal, the conditions of the track, the different types of track, the different lengths. There's so much goes into it. And it's just amazing to hear how you've been able to continue on in this industry and hopefully in the future your legacy continues with some of the bigger races, and hopefully one day we'll see you in the Kentucky Derby, Breeders' Cup, and all those.
It would be fun. I mean, I enjoy it, and my big thing is I love having people involved in it, and so when we had Motion in Motion on the Kentucky Oaks Trail, I kind of did some updates on Facebook and had the news crews come out, and I was very open door policy, and I heard from people that I'd never met before out in California and from New York, and they're like, this is so great to be able to have somebody so open and make their horse available to the fans, whereas people, a lot of it's shrouded in secrecy, and they don't want people to get too excited and
Right.
the horse to get too excited, and so that's my big thing is for this business to, as an industry, to succeed and to grow. I think you really have to get the fans to be a part of the experience, and that's what I try to do with not only my clients' horses, but with anybody involved. If when they come out, is to let them to see, pull the curtain back and show them what we do is on a daily basis, and what this industry is about. And there's so many negative storylines, and I think that's just in the world in general anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Is news is based on negativity, and the thing that Krasinski came out with some good news at SGN, I thought was brilliant, because you don't have any programs that really tell the good stories. Rarely you have one good story to every 10 bad, and so within the fatalities and the breakdowns of Santa Anita from last year, and then so the two big trainers out on the East Coast that got in trouble with medications. You hear all these negative things about horse racing, and then the activists are saying, "Oh, we're out here we just treat them like commodities, and we're killing horses," and it's so far from the truth. And if people could just get out and see how much care we give these horses and how much they mean to us, and I have had horses injured in the past, and it breaks my heart every time. It's like a family member, and they're like, I hate the narrative that we're using these animals for sport, just to burn through them to make money, and that's not the case. I mean, I treat all my horses, like they're family members, that they get as good as care as my kids get, and that's not a slight to my children. That's just how much I care I take in my horses. And that's the one thing. If we do get there where we're on the trail to the Breeders' Cup or the Oaks or the Derby or whatever stake race, I enjoy the fans be able to take part in it and enjoy and get to know the horse and the athletes as much as they can, as intimately as they can.
Well, and you just mentioned something that struck a chord with me, and we talked about it a couple months ago. I'm working on a bull riding documentary, and what you just said is very identical to what the stock contractors say. They're family. They're expensive. They're not, if they don't want to buck, they won't buck. Just like a horse, if he doesn't want to run, he doesn't want to run. So I think people should explore a little bit more about what horse racing and animal athletics is, because it's not all that the negativity that is appearing out there.
Exactly. Everybody just, like we talked earlier about politics and news anymore, it's either left or it's right. You don't really get the true story anymore, it seems like, in the world. And horse racing is no exception. You're going to get an extreme view from one side or the other side, it seems like, and more often than not, the negative side is louder, and they are more adamant about it. And then I think horse racing has had some trouble in the past, and they're still having trouble of creating a unified front to go out there and show, what this industry is about, and how much we care about the athletes. And I would invite anybody out to the racetrack to see, how these horses are taken care of. I mean, it's like they have manicures daily, basically. They have massages daily. They have, acupuncturists. They're adjusted with a chiropractor. I mean, they get IV fluids and buildups just to make sure they have enough nutrients in their bodies and that they're not getting dehydrated during the hot months. I mean, so it's amazing. They're top performing athletes, just like you would see a LeBron James or a Tom Brady to go on and play into his 40s. I mean, that's what these horses get. There's no exception to them. I mean, we don't do the cryotherapy yet, but they have hyperbaric chambers. They don't have the ice baths per se, but they do ice treatment. It's just amazing that level of care and the technology that they have to take care of these animals is so much better than years past, and it gets better in every day. And these horses it's amazing to see, because they'll talk to you when something's wrong or they're not feeling right. They'll let you know, and when they're feeling really good and you've got everything right and you're hitting on all cylinders, they'll let you know. So it's fun to be around them, to see them grow and see them develop, and when you make decisions, regarding their therapies or their training or their nutrition, and make changes and see them blossom and develop and see those things come to fruition. It's very rewarding. And just like your kid going out and, making a game winning shot, you point them to a race and they point to the race and they end up getting to the wire first and getting their picture taken. And to see the horse, a lot of them know that they won. They get a little bit more, a little bigger spring in their step, and they, their head goes up, and you can tell that they have that mentality that they know success when it comes to them,
Right.
and they relish it. So it's neat to see, and it's very rewarding to be able to work with them and get to have those moments.
Well, I can feel your passion for it. So, what's the best advice that you've ever been given working in this industry?
Probably, don't get too high or don't get too low. You have to keep a level head. I mean, it gets really tough when you're going through a streak where you're not winning races, and then conversely, when you win a bunch of races in a short period of time, usually you get a little high and you think, well, I got this figured out, and then it comes back to reality. Crashing back to reality is this game is tough, and it's just probably like a batting average in baseball. If you're batting 300. You're doing really well. And in this game, if you're probably batting 200, you're doing really well. If you're batting, 170, you're probably more in the general ballpark of successful trainers. So it's not a game set up for a lot of success normally. And so you really have to make sure that you kind of handle the highs with the lows and keep you somewhere in the middle.
Finally, for someone who is maybe just a casual fan of horse racing, not the handicapper type, not the wagering type, how should they watch horse racing, either at the track or on TV?
That's always an interesting question, because one thing the horse racing probably does requires a little bit of research, a little bit of background work, because my take on it, if I weren't in the business, is I like to know the athletes. And so whether the jockeys, which are usually the easiest to follow because they do more on them, whether the trainers' connections, or whether the horses. Now, like you said, they're not gamblers or handicappers. The only way to really know the horses is by watching multiple races with the horses being in them, and so you kind of get a feel for who they are as a racehorse. That's where I really enjoy it, is to see them, compete. Whereas it might be the same two horses running against each other that ran a month ago, and to see how they compete and if they change their strategy, or if the distance changes and what they do differently, if the pace sets up differently, so it sets up better for one or the other. But that takes time, and so that's hard. So what I try to do is just watch kind of the beauty of the competition itself, kind of watch what these animals are doing when you're going, 25, 30 miles an hour, and it's a 1,100-pound animal. And these jockeys that are 109 pounds or 112 pounds, 114 pounds, guiding these animals at full speed through each other and around each other and making moves. Decisions when to make a move or when not to make a move or to wait. Those are the things that to me make the sport just really interesting, even if you're not following a particular horse or a particular jockey. Seeing that horse closing, that's one of the big reasons I think Zenyatta was such a fan favorite, even though, she won multiple races in a row, 20-something in a row, but she had that style of running where she would fall way back and then she would come up and just get up at the wire and win it. And so to follow her, you would think, oh, she's not going to do it this time. She's not going to do it this time. You're like, oh, wait, maybe she has a chance. Then she gets up at the last jump and she wins it. And you're just like, oh, whew. I think, those are things that are fun to watch. Or that horse that goes to the lead and he opens up and he just holds on for the late charge from the rest of the field, just to see how those jockeys maneuver those horses and kind of get maybe an extra 16th of a mile out of a horse that probably shouldn't have won that race. And he got him just give that little extra effort for the last, 16th of a mile. Or that horse, like I said, it gets way back and that jockey gets him up just in time to win it. It's neat to see when the rider and the horse are, riding together in unison and competing together, and they become one. And to watch those athletes do it, it's to me, it's an art. It really is.
Yeah.
It's not science. It's not just like, you watch time and time again, the Patriots are down and I know, there's fans and haters of the Patriots, but Tom Brady. But how many times that he makes that exact pass when he needs to at the end of a game to keep the rally going or to win the game? It's just, some things just happen, and whether it's meant to be or they've done so much practice and preparation that it just comes out at that time. That's kind of the way I watch horse racing is if everything comes together at the right time and at the right moment and everybody does their part, then it's amazing to watch.
Well, Tom, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast, and thank you for your friendship. I just wanted to let you know that my parents will tell you hello, and
tell them
I will. And if anyone is interested in Tom Van Berg's horses, if they're on the track, you can look at the silks, which are, as you mentioned, purple and gold with a purple V on the back.
Yep, they're gold with the purple V and purple sleeves.
Purple sleeves. So that's a good way to identify Tom's horses. So thanks again, Tom. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to continuing our friendship going forward.
All right, good talking to you, Don. Take care.
Best of luck with your horses, and hopefully we'll see you in the Kentucky Derby one day.
All right, I hope so. It'd be fun. I hope you'll be able to make it.
Yeah. If that's an invite, I'm there.
You're invited.
All right, Tom. Thanks.
Take care, Don.
That was Tom Van Berg, thoroughbred horse trainer and my good friend. I've known Tom since the fall of 1987, and after losing touch for almost 20 years, we picked up the conversation right where we left it. Tom is truly one of the most genuine people I know, and he has an ability to welcome people into his circle without any reservation. And despite his family lineage of being great horsemen, he is humble and wants people to enjoy the sport of kings that he's grown to love. I'm hoping one day soon he'll have a Kentucky Derby or a Triple Crown contender in the near future. If you'd like to know more about Tom, visit his Facebook page at Jack Van Berg Racing. And if you'd like to find out more about his father, Jack, check out Jack From Grit to Glory, The True Story of Jack Van Berg, an American horse racing legend by Chris Kotulak. The next Sports in the Making podcast will be coming at you every other Thursday through the summer, with an occasional weekly episode depending on when my guests are able to join me. So if you want to be notified, be sure to subscribe. For back episodes, you can visit sportsinthemaking.com or visit my Facebook page where I post sports-related content. And if you have any suggestions on what you'd like to know more about in sports, drop me a line at sportsinthemaking.com or contact me on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. And if you have any questions for my guests, I'd love to include them in a future episode with your name. Wherever you listen to this podcast, I'd appreciate it if you like it, share it, and leave positive reviews on your social media channel. Also be sure to subscribe to Sports in the Making so you don't miss out on more episodes, and you can catch up on previous ones there as well. I'm your host, Don Cardona. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making.